Trump is all set to reach out to China. Europe will act, but Europe, given its nature of 27 countries that form the European Union, things don't happen overnight. But today, Russia and China, unlike in the 60s and 70s, they're not fighting with each other. So I think it's a major denouement for Europe. Some people in US argue that, look, having peace with Russia and Europe is important if US has to deal with the China challenge in Asia. For India, the challenge is if US, Russia, China, and Europe have better relations between themselves than they have relationship with India.
So this week's column deals with, once again, something pressing in the news. The US president had the meeting with his Russian counterpart, Vladimir Putin, in Alaska. While nothing concrete, of course, came out without Ukraine, without Volodymyr Zelensky or the Europeans being present, the sort of contours for an imminent deal seem to be the case. There's a meeting happening between Zelensky and Trump now with some presence with the Europeans, and it seems to be the case, at least, that a deal sooner than later is coming. And some kind, how long that lasts, whether it's just a ceasefire, we'll wait and see. So the first thing is that, as you point out in the piece, is that there is a tendency, I think, even here, maybe it's because of American soft power and culture, that a sort of permanent enemies, the US and Russia. That the big villain is Russia in the Western perspective, and the US is spearheading that anti-Russia campaign. What is the truth to that, and how much is Trump actually upending an assumption, historically speaking, or in the current scenario?
So I think, Russia, if you look at today, Washington establishment, Russia has very few friends, so there is a lot of enmity towards Russia. But Trump has been an exception, and in fact, so is Trump's MAGA movement. Many of them feel that, look, what have we got against Russia? Why should we fight Russia? And as with Trump himself, I've seen him campaign over the last 3 presidential campaigns. Says Russia, Russia, Russia. They say, what's wrong with having a good relationship with Russia? So I think he's broken the norm of the Washington foreign policy establishment and the political class. And he has the support of the MAGA movement. That is, if we can actually, if the Alaska summit, there were some understandings on territorial concessions by Ukraine and the kind of security guarantees US and Europe will give to Ukraine. I think now in this meeting, we'll see whether those are acceptable to Zelensky. And I think Zelensky is in a bad shape. Either he accepts a bad deal now or he accepts a worse deal a few years later. Yeah. And for the Europeans, they don't have the leverage to change. So my sense is, but nevertheless, they need to say yes. And this has to be worked out then with the Russians. So if things go well with the Europeans meeting with Trump, there will be hopefully a second meeting between Trump and Putin. There could be Zelensky as could be part of that meeting. And then you have potentially in early next month sometime, we might have if all goes well. Yeah. In these kind of things, of course, there are a lot of slips between the cup and the lip, as they say. So I think but I think there are understandings clearly. In fact, Trump's tweets on Sunday night and Monday morning make it clear that it's really up to Zelensky to accept or reject. Essentially saying if Zelensky says no, Trump will wash his hands off. So in a way that a stage is being set for a different kind of relationship with Russia, assuming the deal goes through. Yeah. Second, I think many of us in the rest of the world too, we also believe that the US and Russia are enemies forever. But the last 100 years of history tells us it's not true. They collaborated in the Second World War. I think their collaboration was critical for the defeat of Nazi Germany. Enormous sacrifices by the Soviet people. Then you have the massive Lend-Lease program from America to the Soviet Union. Then the collaboration fell apart in the 1950s and 60s, and then they came together again in the 70s as part of the data. And then things collapsed again. Then you had 1990s after the Soviet Union disappeared. There was again cooperation between Russia and America. So I think they've gone through phases. And if Trump is successful, we might go into another phase of collaboration between Russia and Russia and America. And a deal on European security, if that comes out, that I think will be a very, very interesting moment, both for the European trajectory as well as for the US-Russia relationship.
Get to Europe next, but one quick follow-up. One of the things you point out in the piece, which is also interesting, is that it also says something about how Trump is viewing great power relations. It's Russia, for example, like Russia is very happy to reach an accommodation with America, and as we've seen in the past, and even Putin initially when he came to power, subsequently things changed. On what terms is the question, and what are the security guarantees and things like that. Similarly, with China, he seems more than keen to resolve the trade issues. He's looking at a deal. He seems much more aware. He seems much more willing to do sort of shorn of a lot of the US freedom and democracy, which was rhetoric more than reality, as these things can often be. But is he staking considerable political capital, do you think, in changing this sort of Biden era thing? And if he is successful, and to whatever degree he is, how lasting is that, say, if tomorrow there is a new kind of dispensation in the States?
Look, I think even from what we've seen so far on Ukraine, he's fundamentally changed the Western arguments on Ukraine. It was common to say until recently, the West will support Ukraine with whatever it takes till Ukraine's sovereignty is restored. Now we know it's not going to be restored. So in a way, the terms of debate on Ukraine have already changed. On Russia too, I think he's changing the terms of engagement. On China, it's a more complex dynamic. There are trade disputes. There is, it's not that as if Trump is gone soft on China. I think this way we should be careful. What Trump is doing is to jockey himself into a position where he has the upper hand over both China and Russia. That he has as a numero uno in the international system. US is still the largest economy. That it plays the great power game in such a way that it remains on the top of the heap. If that involves accommodation with China on some aspects, with Russia on some aspects, but at the same time pushing them around on some other issues, all this is part of the new geopolitics. I think we are so used to, we always criticize the Americans as saying with us or against us, but our attitude is exactly the same.
Yeah.
Russians are our best friends forever. Americans were very good to us. Now suddenly Americans are not good to us. So this is not the way life works. Even our individual lives, this is not as if you have this, permanent alliances or everything goes, into buddy, hand in hand, we're walking all the time. So I think reality in international life is countries move a bit, jockey a bit. Some things last, some things don't last. So I think we also need to take a more nuanced view of how the rest of the world works, rather than saying who's good, who's bad, who's a friend, who's an enemy. That doesn't really work.
So on Europe, Europe is still a huge. The European Union, of course, and certainly the big powers within Europe, England, France, Germany, and others, are fairly large economic powers. As a bloc, the European Union is still very significant, certainly economically. There's all this pressure from Trump to increase defense spending. They've said 5% of GDP. Do you think, what used to be called the Gaullist idea, during the Cold War, that Europe has, there was France, for example, didn't give up as much of its military, this thing, we're still blind places. Do you think that kind of, that is the way forward for Europe in one sense? And as you pointed out in initial pieces after the Ukraine war broke out, say Germany, for example, has a lot of sympathy for Russia, as well as because of some of the baggage from the Second World War, as well as deep business ties. There were energy ties which were quite significant. Do you think it'll that is the way it's going back again? Europe kind of increasing its own defense as well as engagement on its own terms, given that Trump has sort of sent that signal that it is time to take on more of that burden?
In fact, that's what Trump is saying. Look, you're rich, you're a big economy, almost $19 trillion, as big as China. You take responsibility for your own security. So I think Europe has got so complacent in the idea that the Americans will do all the heavy lifting all the time. So I think they've been shocked into thinking afresh. There's a lot of talk about European sovereignty. Even the Germans, who are very post-war, they've been very, peaceniks, if you will. Now they're talking about expanding spending on defense. There's even a debate on the draft. And they're going to rebuild their military. So I think Europe will act, but Europe, given its nature of 27 countries that form the European Union, Things don't happen overnight. But my sense is Europe will change, will have to get its act together to deal with the fear of America abandoning them, fear of Russia invading them, and the fear of China taking over their markets. So I think it's a major denouement for Europe. And my sense is, though a lot of people say, look, Europe is finished, I mean, I would say it's too fast to say that, too early to say that. And my sense is Europe will find its momentum again through reform and recalibration.
So then the other thing, what you've called the reverse Kissinger. Kissinger famously, I mean, there was a trip to China and then the Sino-Soviet split as we had repercussions in Indian communist movements and everything. It was felt around the world at the time. And now it seems that if you want to wean Russia away from China a bit, then no two other power, you should be closer to all the major, America in this case, not, I mean, closer to every other major power than they are with each other. Uh, do you think it's easier said than done, of course. China and Russia are now quite close. But what the way forward would be, and again, and we can come to that later, but also India in this scenario, it's not a superpower compared, I mean, we're not comparable to China or America in many ways, but that India also shouldn't be left out in the cold as a result of this. We'll buy oil. Like we were happy to say, oh, we'll get something from everyone and no one will. I mean, it was almost an Indian exceptionalism that we seem to be batting for with the Ukraine war. And the thing is that perhaps that time, if not to rethink, to nuance that, given the evolving geopolitical
Yeah.
scenario.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think this idea that, look, just as Kissinger turned, China against Russia, I mean, took advantage of China-Russia conflict to bring China closer to the US. So some people talk about bringing Russia closer to the West. But today, Russia and China, unlike in the 60s and 70s, they're not fighting with each other. They're allies in a partnership without limits. So I think what is being tried, I think, is to loosen up that equation so that Russia becomes an independent actor. Russia has more room to play, and it will not be a subordinate actor to China. Similarly, US will also have more freedom of action. Some people in US argue that, look, having peace with Russia and Europe is important if US has to deal with the China challenge in Asia. So that is the other argument. So what they're trying to do, I think, is to find a way to complicate the Russia-China relationship rather than expecting a break. That's not going to happen. On the China question again, I mean, I think Trump is all set to reach out to China. I think there is speculation about a potential summit in October between President Xi and President Trump. So I think what they're doing is, look, they want to have a primacy in this triangular dynamic. Europe, anyway, they've got them under control. They want to have a decent relationship with Russia. And Trump also wants a decent relationship with China, so that he shapes the play rather than a Sino-Russian alliance or a BRICS or shaping the world, that he's creating room for the United States in this process. I think here is the principle that the US should have good relationship with all the major powers, and if possible, better than what they have with each other. You might not get there immediately because China and Russia have a very good relationship today. But I think that is the effort. And similarly, US-China relationship economically is much, much bigger than what China has with anybody else. So I think US has levers on both sides. They'll try and play those. I think for India, the challenge is if US, Russia, China, and Europe have better relations between themselves than they have relationship with India, then I think there's a danger we might get squeezed out. So I think the task for Indian statecraft now is really to prevent that outcome, to be able to strengthen ties with all the major powers, notwithstanding our current difficulties with the US. And we have even bigger difficulties with China on the border. So I think find space to strengthen our position. But this is not a problem that's going to be solved by diplomacy alone. We also need to strengthen ourselves internally. That is more economic reform, accelerated economic growth. Those are really key to create leverages with the other powers. And finally, I would also say there is also danger that we might get trapped into a permanent conflict with our two major neighbors. And if we get trapped into that, the US, the China, Russia, everyone will have bigger room to play in the subcontinent. Therefore, I think we need to find ways to bring stability and peace to our own neighborhood. Without that, the great powers will have a chance to undermine India even more.
Right, sir. Thanks a lot. Everyone, read the piece. It's on the IndianExpress.com. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Akash.